So in this video, I want to talk a little bit about how to detect inner conflicts and how to work with them. And the reason it's important to detect inner conflict is because we all have a vast number of automated processes, thought processes, emotional processes, and so on, that are created to help us deal with the situations that we find ourselves in everyday life. And because these automated processes, they contain emotions, they contain certain perspectives, they contain certain behavioral patterns, so they kind of resemble a person. And for this reason, we often call these automated processes personality parts. And one thing that's really important in personal spiritual development is to detect when there are conflicts between personality parts and then work with them. And the reason is that conflicts between personality parts can really take up a lot of our awareness. And when our awareness is occupied with conflicts, we are less likely to notice what is there beyond our thoughts and emotions. And noticing what is there beyond our thoughts and emotions is crucial for personal and spiritual development. So it might sound funny, but it's not always easy to detect inner conflict. It depends on how you relate to the personality parts that are in conflict. And a nice way of categorizing different types of conflicts, or different ways in which you can experience inner conflict, is to think that sometimes you will be very identified with one of the two personality parts that's in conflict, and sometimes you will experience that your identification shifts between the two parts. So that's one dimension. And then the other dimension is when you're identified with a personality part, how strongly is it going to repress the other personality part? Sometimes you might be identified with one personality part, but you know the other personality part is there. You might not like it from this vantage point, but you know it's there. Other times, when you're identified with one personality part, it obliterates your awareness of the other personality part. So you don't even know that you contain that pattern. And so if we use these two dimensions, we can create 4 different categories of how you can experience inner conflict. And when you know these different experiences of inner conflict, then that can help you detect inner conflict, even though your experience of it might seem very different. So the first one is if there's a weak repression of the opposing personality part and an unstable identification. So you switch between the two. In that case, I call this the doubter. So this, when you experience inner conflict in that way, you will typically feel split, you will feel stuck, you will feel ambivalent, you might feel paralyzed. So you can here you can see the perspective of the one personality part, and you can empathize with it, you can see that there's some rationale behind it, and you can see the other personality part, you can feel its emotions, and you can empathize with that. And since they're in conflict, you will feel that there's no good way out of this. No matter what you do, if you follow one, then the other one is not achieving its goal. And if you follow the other, the first one is not achieving the goal. So typically, this is where you feel split, you feel stuck, you feel ambivalent, or you feel paralyzed because you can't make a choice. In that case, the way to work with the conflict is to, one at a time, inquire into the ultimate goal of each part. Because often the personality parts will have an agenda, will have certain goals that they are going for, but that's not their ultimate goal. You might have a personality part that is going for a lot of alone time, right? Not seeing any people. But that's not the ultimate goal. Then you inquire, why do you want all this alone time? And you might see that it's because this part is seeking a sense of peace. And then you might have another part that is very much into engaging with other people, fill up the calendar with appointments and so on. But the goal of that part isn't just the social interaction. It's what it believes it will get from the social interaction. Maybe it will feel alive. When you see what each personality part is ultimately after, often the conflict will dissolve, as you can feel peaceful and very alive at the same time. You might not be able to engage with people and be alone at the same time, but fortunately that's not the goals. The ultimate goal is to feel peace, feel connected, or feel alive, and these feelings can coexist. The doubter position is the easiest position to work with conflict from, because you will already have some empathy for each of the sides. Then there's the next one. I call it the aesthetic, or ascetic. This is where, again, there's a weak repression, so you are aware of both parts, but your identification is stable. So you see yourself, you identify with one part, its perspective, its emotions, its agendas, its values. And from here, the other part looks like something that's flawed in you, something that's wrong with you. The ascetic would typically be identified with one personality part, and from there wage war against the other personality part. So you will try to rid yourself of something that you see as problematic in yourself. The way to work with the conflict from when you experience the conflict like this is the same. It's still seeing the ultimate goal of each personality part. However, here an important part of it is to invite the part you're identified with to take a break, suspend judgment, and allow you to disidentify from it, or pause your engagement with it, and then go to the other part, empathize with it. And even though you say, well, but this is a bad part, I should get rid of it, you have to empathize with it and say, well, what is it actually ultimately going for? And when you see that, you will see that what you thought was a bad part of you is not a bad part of you. It's just a part of you that doesn't make sense from the vantage point that you're used to looking at it. So this was the doubter and the ascetic. Then there is the what I call the crusader. The crusader is also where your identification with one part is stable, but you have repressed the other part. So you probably don't even know that you have another part. You might not even be aware that there is any conflict within you. The telltale signs that you are experiencing an inner conflict here is that you will probably have quite intense judgments against other people who exhibit certain traits or certain behaviors. And so it is exactly this, the intensity in your judgment of other people that shows you that you are that there is something in you that's very determined to attack certain traits or certain behaviors, and that's because you are attacking them in yourself, and you're doing a lot to keep them repressed. So you kind of say, well, no, I don't have it, but they have it, and they're wrong. And so you can imagine that if you are very intense in your judgment of certain other people, if you actually had that trait in yourself, it would be repressed, right? Because of the intensity of the attack. Once I heard that in the IFS, the internal family systems, in that world, they have this rule of thumb or saying. They say, if it is intense, it is yours. And this really speaks to this situation, right? The intensity is what shows you that you have that side yourself. It's just repressed. And so the way to work with the inner conflict is, first of all, to reveal that you have that inner side. This can be difficult to do by yourself if you are a therapist working with a client, then it's good to know that the intensity points to an internal conflict in the client, and not get fooled. It's not necessarily just an interpersonal conflict, it's an intrapersonal conflict. And so the way to work with this is to, again, empathize with the part that is under attack, and find situations where you yourself exhibit the behavior you are judging or the traits you are judging, and then use that connection not just to beat yourself up and say, oh my God, I'm committing the sin that I judge other people for, but say, well, maybe there's a reason for it. It might be clunky, it might have a lot of bad side effects, but it has some sort of beautiful and positive intention. And it's really taking that perspective, again, suspend judgment against the part that's being judged, and then say, well, if I look at it afresh, if I assume it's trying to do something wonderful, what might that be? And if I look at the situations in which I myself, if I can find situations where I recognize that I exhibit those traits or engage in those kind of behaviors, that's great, because that will help me say, well, in those situations, what is it I'm really trying to do here? So that can be an entry point to understand the other side. And again, you might be very familiar with the intentions of the side you identify with. When you become also familiar with the intentions and goals of the ultimate goals of the side you're not identifying with, you will see at that level there is no conflict, because all parts of you are ultimately just seeking to thrive. All parts of you are just seeking to become aware of being, of presence, of that which is beyond thought and emotions. Then there's the last part, and this can be a little bit of a confusing one. So this is where there's a strong repressive force. So when you're identified with one part, you're not aware of the other, and you don't think you have the other, but you still shift from side to side. So if you want to detect this yourself, it's good to keep a journal and sort of write down your outlook on life, and then read through your journal entries and see, are you sometimes expressing completely opposite opinions? If you're a therapist working with a client, and the client will say something at some point in the session, and then they will say the complete opposite at a later point in the session. And when you ask them, do you remember that you said this like 5 minutes ago? And they say, no, I don't remember it. Or maybe I said it, but that was a mistake. It was wrong. I don't know why I said it. Well, this might just be because there's an inner conflict where each part is exerting a strong repressive force on the other, and the client's point of identification is shifting. So I call this one the shapeshifter. The main way to work with this, again, the overall idea here is you need to get into the shoes of each part and understand what they're ultimately working or reaching for. The difficulty here is that when you give attention to one part, the other part tends to jump in and take over control, and then you can no longer work with the one part. So the importance here is to give long enough attention to each side to really understand it. So really help the part that gets agitated when you work with the other part and say, don't jump in, it's fine, I got this, and give me long enough time to understand this other part. For the doubter, for the ascetic, and for the crusader, speaking the language of stepping out of the one part in order to engage with the other, disidentifying from a part, unblending from a part, demerging from a part, can be very useful. But for the shapeshifter, I think it can sometimes be difficult, because For the shapeshifter, each part gets very agitated if you start using that language and say, let's demerge from this part, let's give attention to the other part. It says, no, 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 no. Now you're taking the other part's side. I'm not going to allow that. So there, it might be better to, instead of saying unmerging or unblending from one part in order to engage with another, just merge with both parts. Use that language. So instead of disidentifying from parts, identify with more parts. In that way, you can get a sense of every part, but without emphasizing that you're keeping a connection to all parts. Now, when we are talking about demerging from a part, ultimately what we want is that when you're merged with the personality part, your perspective is narrowed because it becomes reduced to the perspective of that part. Demerging from the part broadens your perspective. It's like more of your resources come online, more of your thinking, more you open your mind, you open your heart, and more of your resources come online. And this is important. But actually, you can achieve the same not by demerging from parts, but by merging with more and more and more parts. So in the extreme scenario, when you're demerged from all parts, or if you are merged with all parts, you achieve the same. Your mind is broadened, your heart is broadened, and more of your resources come online. So this is just a little tip when the two parts you're working with are sort of very nervous and very eager to repress each other. It can be good to talk about merging with more parts rather than demerging with parts. So this is a nice little framework that I find very useful when working with inner conflicts. So organized along the dimension of weak repression, strong repression, stable and unstable identification. You have the doubter, the ascetic, the crusader, and the shapeshifter. And while the overall way of working with the conflicts by understanding the ultimate purpose of each side is the same for all of them, there are some pretty important nuances or details in how you can work with each of these manifestations or types of experiencing inner conflict. So I hope this was helpful, and have a lovely day.